All right. And now being recorded live on YouTube. So, welcome to the Digital Hallway on Face to Face Broadcasting. I'm Sean Smith, if you haven't already met me here in this space. And today we're going to be talking about mental illness, social media, and your teens. Now, I do this because I think it's important for all of us to understand how much mental illness and mental health and social media play an integral part with each other in the grander picture here. Just give me a moment here because I want to move one of our links over so that I can share that with you as well, because it's going to be part of our overall conversation today. What I think is important that everybody understand is that there isn't any real age limit. When I say that we're talking about teen mental health, it's actually far beyond just the teen mental health. And let's see an article. All right, we're going to put this over here for right now. There. So first off, let me just kind of bring you into a fact of my life. A lot of people may not realize this, may not know it. It's not something that I share on a regular basis unless it's something that needs to be talked about. I deal with mental illness issues. I have been diagnosed with major depressive disorder, persistent depressive disorder, and depression aggravated by service, meaning that I went into the military suffering from depression, and being in the military just made my depression worse. So I've actually got an actual diagnosis, but that was 35 years in the making. As it turns out that I was suffering from depression going back into my early teens, and possibly even sooner than that. But a lot of the story that I have goes back to my teenage years and how I dealt with it. And yes, I even attempted suicide once, but unsuccessful. And thank goodness for that. One of the greatest things that helps keep me, and this is what my psychologist told me, one of the greatest things that keeps me on the level and keeps me from falling over the cliff is my family, my wife and my kids. They are a huge part of my life, and they are the anchor that keeps me from going over an edge that there might not be any return from. And when we're dealing with teens, we're dealing with people who may also be suffering from a form of mental illness, misdiagnosed or undiagnosed. And family plays an amazing and important part of this. What teens are facing today is something that we all faced as teenagers. That teenage angst, the hormones going all over the place, and the environment that teens grow up in. And if you have mental illness on top of that, it becomes a very difficult environment to grow up in. When I was in my teens, nobody talked about mental illness at all, really. If you were mentally ill or you were seriously mentally ill, you often found yourself in an institution. There wasn't any real medication for it, and there wasn't any real help for it, and certainly there wasn't enough counseling involved in the process to help you deal with it. So in today's teens, there's a lot more information out there, and there's a lot more that can be done to assist a teen. But the first and foremost thing that will help a teen deal with the issues that are in their life that may be affected by mental illness is having the parent be able to recognize that perhaps there's something more than just teenage hormones and angst. I believe strongly that much of what we see on social media from teens today is driven by their peer group. And I think a lot of people will understand that. But there's also a certain portion that's driven by their home life. When I talk about social media and teens, I try and make sure that people understand that there's a very strong dividing line between what the parents are responsible for and what schools and other organizations are responsible for. And parents are responsible for the moral and ethical side of a teen's use of social media and the internet. Whereas the schools are much more inclined to be required to make social media better understood, the tools, the safety, that aspect. But at the core of social media is the social side, and those social cues and that social etiquette is something that needs to be taught at home. And the only way that it can really be taught at home is if the parents understand what kind of world that digital teen is in these days. So part of the reason that the digital hallway exists is to help educate parents, teachers, and teens. Parents specifically, because I think it's very important that parents be more actively involved in the social online life that their teens are in, and being able to understand the cues that they are going to be exposed to when a teen is suffering from cyberbullying, when they are suffering from the pressures of school and online life, when mental illness is playing a part in their day-to-day operation. If a child faces mental illness, many things may either just not be talked about, not be discussed, and perhaps even avoided at all costs, whereas others may take that small issue and blow it up into a huge thing. This is where I think counseling plays a very big part. My son, my youngest boy, suffers from depression, and he's a marvelous child. And I'm not being biased. I've actually had other people say he's a marvelous child. But he suffers from depression. We've actually had him diagnosed as suffering from depression. And as parents, our concern was less about the mental illness and more about how we can help him work through the issues that come with that mental illness. Counseling has played an amazing part in his dealing with the day-to-day life, mainly because we don't want to deal with having to give him medication at this stage. When you're as old as I am, having that daily pill makes a big difference. But right now, for him, at just 11 years old, it's important that we help him get the tools that he needs to help him deal with the issues that he faces and the mental illness that he has to deal with. And the counseling has played such an amazing and positive part in his ability to socially interact with people. Now, he's not on social media yet because he's not 13 years old. We'll get into another part of that here in a minute from News Today. And despite his desire to want to get onto social media, I'm not going to let him, at least until he's 13, but also not until such time as I'm comfortable knowing that he's comfortable in his social skin, because that social skin is going to be online as well as offline. And the online world reaches into a much larger society than what he currently experiences just going to school and being with his friends and being with his choir and what have you. So it's important that we understand as a whole that when a child gets into the social media space, they're not getting into a space that's simply condensed into the world that they currently have access to. It exposes them to a much larger space and the problems that are in that larger space, the influence that social media plays on the individual child, whether it be girls and body types, whether it be boys and what's manly and what's not manly, whether it be the news of the day, which can be really frightening at times and made more frightening by the idea that they don't fully understand what they're looking at online. That's why it's important that parents be part of the overall conversation that their kids are involved in. And especially if they're starting out in the very beginning, it's really important that if your child is going to be in the social media space, that you monitor their use and watch how they're acting and reacting to the content that they're seeing online. I know that I spend an awful lot of time with my oldest child, who's, God help me, turning 16 this month. And all of the things that he potentially would see. But I also know that he doesn't spend a lot of time there because he's very much an isolated, introverted child. And he likes his small group of friends, and he likes his cadet training, and he likes all the things that he does in his little space, and he doesn't like to take it much beyond. Yes, he is on Facebook, but he's not a pervasive user of it. He tends to actually to text message with his close friends more than anything else. And I like that. But I also monitor his devices to make sure that I'm aware of what content he's viewing, where he's viewing it, and how he's viewing it, and more than anything else, when he's viewing it. We utilize Disney Circle, Circle by Disney, with Disney at home to help monitor their internet use. But once they're outside of our home, we don't really have quite as much access and control. So it's important that we spend time looking at their digital devices and reminding them that they don't own those digital devices. But again, to the mental illness side of things, as a person who deals with mental illness, and especially with depression, it's an ebb and flow environment. You aren't always depressed and you aren't always up. You are on an up and down curve on a pretty regular basis. Today, I am suffering from a bad man cold, the one that puts me down on my butt, but probably wouldn't even faze my wife. But that illness and the inability to kind of drag my sorry butt out of bed to do anything actually enhances my depression. So it's been a bit of a struggle just today to get anything done. And if it wasn't for a couple of too many pieces of chocolate and a couple of too many drinks of coffee, I probably wouldn't be here either. But it's an important conversation. But I'm still fighting that piece. And then as an adult who has had to deal with adversity through a better part of our lives, it's a little bit easier for us to find the tools and the energy and the drive that we need in order to get over that hump. And for teens who aren't familiar with the mental illness aspect and how to deal with those issues, if they've never had anybody show them or tell them how to deal with that stuff, it's a real hurdle for a lot of kids. And what we might look at as being lazy or uninterested or just a typical teen may be much more than that. And I think it's important that parents pay close attention to that and start learning a little bit more about teen mental health. We have to take a look at mental health from an angle it's less about something that is empirically obvious in front of us to the stuff that's not quite so obvious. The world was in absolute shock when Robin Williams committed suicide. Nobody in a better part of the world who knew him from his television and TV appearances really knew the man and how much he was affected by depression until he was gone. And that's a lot of people that have passed on. We think that they have a great life, and what we see as a great life, and then suddenly they're gone. Musicians, actors, people who make millions of dollars, have adoring fans everywhere, have great families and great lives, are suddenly no longer with us because we didn't realize the level of their depression. Imagine what that's like for a child who is suffering from depression, who is suffering from some form of mental illness, and they don't actually have that same type of support network in place to help them through. So having parents pay closer attention to their child's lives and being more familiar with mental illness is abundantly important. I highly, highly recommend that if you haven't seen it yet, is to check out Sam Fiorella and Yellow is for Hello, the Friendship Bench. The Friendship Bench is a program started by Sam not long after his son committed suicide. And his son had the world at his feet. He was in university, he had a great group of friends, he had a very bright future ahead of him, and by all accounts from his friends, he would be the first person to come up and ask if somebody needed just to talk. So what was actually happening was that taking on of the burden of other people's issues and being at the forefront likely enhanced his own depression issues. And nobody realized what was going on with him until it was too late. Now, to Sam's credit, he got past the grief and he realized that this is a question that needs to be talked about more rather than less. And it needs to be faced head on rather than from behind the scenes. So check out the Friendship Bench online. All you have to do is search Google for the Friendship Bench and you can find all of that aspect. He's got a great deal of content in there that will help you better understand mental illness and your youth. So we're sitting at about 15 minutes to the top of the hour. And as I said, I was going to open up the broadcast to everybody who might want to pop in and say hi and add their 2 cents to this. I noticed that Julie and Angela are in the house, so all you have to do is click that join button, ladies. And I'm just going to make sure that I have the audience view on. Turn on auto join. And there we go. And all you need to do is just click the join button. You should be able to see that down on the bottom left or bottom right of your screen. And it's a pretty simple tool. I can see in there in the chat. Make sure you see that. There we go. So if you want to join, if you've got a webcam, Julie Selby is one of my favorite people. She is a person who can educate the pants off you. She is the kindest, most gentle person you will ever have the pleasure of meeting. And she's also the first one to be camera shy sometimes. It's quite fun. But you know what? That's fine too. I am happy to talk to anybody. One thing that I wanted to talk about today as well, one of the things I wanted to talk about today as well was something that that came up and we're talking about mental illness and how children deal with the problems that they're facing in school. Hey, Angela, how are you?
Hi, Sean. I'm good. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Fabulous.
I'm just going to pop in here for a second. I want to show the audience this. You'll probably get bumped here for a moment while I show it to everybody.
Sure.
Oh, good. It kept you in. So this came into the news the other day, and this 10-year-old girl committed suicide because of bullying. And the bullying wasn't just in school. There was some online aspect to it as well. So you have to think, what is going through a 10-year-old's head where they think that they can't deal with any of the issues that they're facing any longer. And it's so bad that the only solution that they can come to is to kill themselves. And I think that as we discuss and we build on the mental health issue, it's important that we work with the fact that it's not just teens that are facing it, it's not just adults that are facing it, it's our younger children as well. As I said, my oldest boy, or my youngest boy, is 11 years old, and we've been working with him since he was 9. And it's been a great help. He could have very easily ended up in this direction, but we were fortunate enough to have a father who suffers from pretty much the same thing. So that made all the difference in the world. So for those of you who don't know this fine lady, this is Angela Crocker. One of my very good friends, a social media camp alumni, same as myself. She's a social educator in so many veins. She's an author. She is a serial student, and I'm going to emphasize that. I'm relatively certain that Simon Fraser University will building a new wing on their school based solely on her tuition fees.
I don't know about that.
Well, and Angela actually has a new book coming out as well called Declutter Your Data.
Yes.
I'm actually giving that one to my son because as much as I need data decluttered, one of the things that my son learned about being better at his day-to-day life is being more organized.
Yes.
And so he's dealing, I mean, he's a grade 11 student. He's got cadets, he's got band, he's got work, and all of his school life. And, the rest of it looks like a digital bomb went off.
I can help him.
Declutter his data mixed with Mike Vardy's productivity and Dad's mental health observation and social media awareness. We've got a pretty good kid on our hands.
Definitely.
So, Angela, I'd love to hear your thoughts on kids and dealing with mental health issues in school. I know that you go to school with a lot of university students and the pressures that they face. What's your impression on all this?
Well, I think one of the things, just thinking about Simon Fraser University, where I am a graduate student in particular, one of the things that really strikes me that's different now as a grad student as opposed to 20 years ago as an undergraduate student is how much the school community focuses on mental health and just general well-being. There are, I got an email just today, just reminding me that my student health benefits include access to the counselors. And if I'm, it's exam and final, sort of end of term, end of semester time right now. And if I was under duress, I have access to those counselors. They also do some fun sort of social things. They have puppy therapy. They have the SFU Bake Off. I'm not sure if I got the name right, but they had a bunch of faculty and staff and students were invited to bring their best baking, and then for a nominal fee, students could go and taste. And these little things that are sort of comforts of home, interaction with a pet, maybe they're away from their pet living in residence, a rent-a-puppy from the SPCA or other organization. There's something about that. And I really am struck by how the university is putting mental health very far forward and working really hard to make sure that everyone is doing okay.
Are you finding that the universities are trying to build much more of a community as opposed to strictly academic?
My experience at university has always been that there is community. What is interesting now as opposed to 20 years ago is, of course, the social media factor. As many campuses do within Facebook, for example, Simon Fraser has a community, and you need an @sfu.ca email address in order to access those sub-communities. There's one for grad students, there's one for various residences, various faculty groups, and so on. And I think that sense of community as an extension of the face-to-face. Academia can be really lonely. You might have 100 pages a week to read per course, and if you're taking 5 courses, which isn't unusual for an undergraduate student, that's a lot of reading to slog through that you mostly need to do alone. But through social media, there are places where you can interact, you can vent, you can share, you can just sort of find out what's going on. Maybe if you're coming up for air for half an hour, what's happening on the AQ or in the Convocation Mall or at one of the satellite campuses at Harbour Centre or Surrey Central. And those social media connections help people find the in-person connections. And as you know, Sean, I'm a big fan of a continuum between our interactions through medium like this. Here we are having a conversation, and later this week, as it happens, we're actually going to see each other. And I know, I'm excited too. But I do think that there's a place for social media to be part of that continuum of a social group. And if it helps people get out, great. If it provides support when they can't get out, whether it's academia or the weather or an injury or they're having a bad mental health day with a man cold, I'm sorry to hear you're not well. These are, try not to share.
Fortunately, it's not a digital virus. One thing that I also wanted to get your opinion on today, and it just came out. I'm going to bring this one up as well because I saw it today and I went, "You have got to be kidding me!" And we'll put this one up over on the big screen as well. Come on, Reuters. There we go. And back here, and I love the F2F broadcasting tool because I can do this.
Ooh.
Yeah. Facebook rolls out Messenger app for kids under 13.
Huh. I hadn't seen that one.
Say what?
Does it say how far under 13? Like, can a 2-year-old have Messenger?
Yeah, it's basically something that can be set up by the parent, and the parent has monitoring and control features in it. Wow. But it allows the under 13 marketplace to utilize social media messenger, Facebook Messenger. Now,
wow.
The Facebook's statement is this isn't about marketing, this isn't about selling, this isn't about anything other than giving preteens and children the opportunity to use this platform. But I'm sorry, this is Facebook. You don't think for a second that they're not trying to mine information out of this with keywords? I mean, even the Reuters article itself specifically states an as yet untapped marketplace.
Of course.
That What a coincidence that they would be rolling this out just before the Christmas holiday,
Yeah.
where if you
Well,
have kids
and
online,
they're not the only organization that makes this kind of chat possible.
no, they're
Certainly,
not.
Messenger is more data rich. It's more multimedia rich because you can share videos and GIFs and all of
Mhm.
those things. Um, as you know, I also have an 11-year-old son, and we've
What a great
MacGyvered a
name,
couple
I
of
might add.
things.
Best name ever.
What's that?
Best name ever.
Oh, well, I thought you might like that. We'll have to start a rumor that my son's named after you.
Well,
Anyway, um, so for my Sean, we've actually MacGyvered a couple of ways for him to use messaging. One lot through iMessage, so that he can message me on my iPhone when I'm out and about, and the other through WhatsApp, so that he has a direct line to his grandfather who lives in Calgary.
mhm.
Um, Obviously, they're both heavily monitored and restricted. He does not have his own mobile phone. He does not have a data plan. He doesn't have a texting plan. All of those sorts of restrictions are in place. But for us as a family, we've started very young and have been working very slowly on the building blocks of his experience online. And I'd say we probably started when he was 4 years old. And having access to this iMessage and WhatsApp opportunities are more building blocks, because he's only a year and a half away from that magical age of 13 when he can have a wider social media presence officially. We'll wait and see whether he earns that right and whether he keeps it. I suspect he will, because we're
Well,
working
you know
hard
what?
to train
That's a
him.
good point. It's a good point. Is that you're making social media a privilege rather
Mhm.
than a right to access,
Yeah.
and I think that's lost on a lot of people. Is that you're infringing on my rights to freedom of speech or what have you, and it's like no, no, no. This is not a right. This is not
No.
written into the charter. This is not a right. This is a privilege. Your access to this as a parent to the child is a privilege. I can take it away just as quickly as I can take away the car if you're 16 years old and you want to drive.
And even
It
as adults, it's a privilege, just as it's a privilege that we both have warm homes and beds to sleep in tonight and food in our bellies from dinner and know that we'll get breakfast tomorrow. There are a lot of people who are living on a digital poverty line where,
and that's really interesting because Julie just sent me a New York Times article that I'll probably share off on the Digital Hallway page as well,
right?
about how Facebook has basically changed the internet and how it's viewed and used. And there was an interesting piece in there about how Facebook has gone into smaller countries like dark Africa space. And when I say dark Africa, I mean like there isn't a whole lot of connectivity out there,
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
they're offering basically free internet access, but through Facebook as opposed to through a browser. So the
right.
only experience that these businesses and these people are having with regards to the internet, where in most cases it's accessed through a mobile device because there's no physical infrastructure to access it. They have free access to the internet, but it's through a very specific tool, which is Facebook. So you're only
Hmm.
going to see the Facebook view of the internet and the world versus the complete picture. They had a really interesting story how you're a person in a Muslim country and you're watching Facebook and you see a video of the mayor saying things bad about Muslims and you get all
Yeah,
riled up and you go off and you lead the charge to end this person's career because he's anti-Muslim. He gets voted out, and you find out later that the video was edited to show only the
yeah,
bad side of the commentary,
yeah.
and that he wasn't actually anti-Muslim. He was anti the extreme side or whatever. So your entire opinion has been influenced by the Facebook feed. I think we're also seeing this with our children when it comes to social media in general, how so much of their online lives have influenced them to act and react to the stuff on the outside world based solely on what they're seeing in that online tool, in that space.
That's been an important part of our parenting journey. My husband and I is talking with our son about different points of view, about bias, about how people can manipulate the facts, about how the language that is used can change your perception of a story. If you talk about roasting rabbits as opposed to cooking bunnies, you have very different perspectives on what that story is. And that's been an interesting set of conversations as a parent. And like I said, we started really young, and we're a language-oriented family, and not every family is going to be as language-oriented as we are. What do I do for a living again? Right.
Something about writing.
Yeah, something about books. But teaching kids those sorts of skills, I think this is where I think we get into trouble between what are the responsibilities of teachers and what are the responsibilities of parents. I agree with what I think I heard you say earlier, that parents are responsible for the social niceties and teachers can enhance that with skills within different online environments, whether that's Google search or chat within your school group or research, LinkedIn perhaps, some of those kinds of things. But there's this really mushy gray ground in the middle where who talks to our kids about fake news, who talks to them about bias, who introduces them to the ways that information can be presented and how it can manipulate what you think but also your emotion and creating that.
Well, and again, I would hate to put teachers into the position of being responsible for telling children, what is fake news and what's not fake news. I mean, all we have to do is look at provincial election time, and if there's a teacher out there that even mentions their political view or their political standing to the classroom, parents freak out.
Yep.
So who are we to say, this is fake news and this isn't fake news? Again, this is something that the parents and the family model should be responsible for influencing. And hopefully they're doing it in such a way where they're allowing the children to look at the content and make their own decisions based on knowledge rather than, well, my dad's always voted conservative, so I vote conservative. Which
wouldn't be an unusual scenario for any first-time voter.
It's not an unusual thing at all. There's a lot of people out there that are still making their decisions in life based on what their parents taught them growing up. Yeah. And that's well and good, but it came from their parents. Social graces are not usually taught in school. Miss Etiquette doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And that those social graces and the pleases and thank yous, those are always taught in school, but only after it's been taught to parents. And the context in school is showing respect to your teachers and your principal. You don't call your principal a butthole.
I would hope not.
He might just be, but you don't do that.
Right. Inside thoughts,
which again, I mean, it's another thing that we should be teaching as parents. We should be teaching our children that what you say and do online should be exactly the same thing that you say and do in person. And if you're not willing to do it in person, then you shouldn't do it online.
Yeah.
And again, we're dealing with issues around mental health and mental illness. Kids today probably should not be saying, I suffer from depression, knowing full well that there's going to be a bunch of kids out there that take advantage of it. Because they haven't been taught well by their parents as to what the social etiquette is around those issues, where compassion plays a big part. And compassion is not taught in school. Compassion is supposed to be taught at home. Empathy is supposed to be taught at home. Sympathy is supposed to be taught at home. Being able to be an upstanding citizen is not taught online or in the classroom. It's taught at home. Your school is there to teach you the skills to make your way through life and society. but your personal skill sets are something that should be taught at home, because that's going to be the biggest influence on social media. When you are in the social media space today, there's a lot of influence that comes from social media and how they see their peers and how their peers are acting. If their peers act and do things in a certain way and get away with it, well, of course they're going to think it's okay and they can get away with it too.
Mm-hmm.
All the more
I
reason.
think there's another layer to the problem, Sean, and part of it is that, at least here in British Columbia, we have this newly rolled out curriculum, which really has woven into all of the new core competencies things that are about digital living. Not necessarily social media, but certainly about using technology. And very rarely does technology not involve being on the internet these days. They're just part and parcel. And where the challenge, I think, is coming is that many teachers have chosen not to participate in a lot of the online community opportunities, have been very selective about their digital footprint for fear of the ramifications on their job. And yet now the new curriculum is suggesting that they should be incorporating more of this technology in the communications competency, in the community competency, and they don't have the experience yet. Some parents will look, if they've happened to look at the curriculum, and see that these are things that are going to be taught in school. And so they assume they will be, and the teachers, some are equipped, some are not.
Doing.
Sorry, Sean, I missed that.
They assume that this content's going to be taught by people who know what they're doing.
Right.
And some teachers, it's going to be kind of like, well, the phys ed teacher took some science in university. He's been teaching phys ed for 17 years, but you know what? We've got this teacher who's going to be sick today, and you had science when you were in university, so you're teaching a science class today.
Right.
Say what now?
Yeah.
Even things like the K-12 coding classes. Coding is a very specific course to be taught. Who are the teachers that are going to be teaching it?
Yeah.
Are they going to have experience in coding, or did they just take a professional development day and got a crash course on how to teach coding? Coding is much more of a passion than a tool. Mm-hmm. This was actually one of the conversations that I was having with the Rethink Summit team about the upcoming conference in April, and discussing about how the schools are pushing things like coding and pushing things like the digital space, but social media still isn't added into that curriculum education. And yet it's the single most pervasive communication tool that kids use today. And they're not being shown how to use it at all, if not effectively. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting conversation that I think is probably going to be one that's very high on the topic list for the Digital Hallway in the coming future.
I'm sure we'll talk about it many, many times.
Well, we're certainly going to be talking about it on the 7th when you're up here in glorious semi-wet Campbell River.
Can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it.
That's going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to actually be at Headcase VR in Campbell River, which is a virtual reality arcade.
Excellent.
Probably do our interview there.
Fantastic.
Because it's an ideal location. This is a place that is a modern day arcade that we used to have in the 80s, but it deals with virtual reality and PC gaming. And a large part of the clientele are tweens and teens who are showing up to get that experience that they might not otherwise get, because it's a pretty expensive experience to purchase on your own. So the clientele that are in there are ranging in ages from 10 to, well, I think the oldest person we saw in there was 70.
I could see it. Absolutely.
You ain't seen nothing until you saw Grandma hawking away at some bad guys on virtual reality. But yeah, it's also a great space to see how kids interact with each other in the virtual space as well as in the personal space, because in the virtual space, they're at their computers and they're playing head to head, but now they're face to face with their competition versus, somewhere on the other side of town on the internet. Language changes drastically when you're talking in person to somebody. Some of the language that they use in games like Call of Duty or Overwatch or what have you, if you've ever seen some of those chats, you're going, what now? But that's not the same language they use when they're in a bit of a public space. So you really get to see a change in the dynamic, and you kind of wonder well, why is it okay here but not here?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Well,
I
maybe
have
it's
to
an opportunity to draw it to their attention.
well, it's drawn to their attention simply because them's the rules. you're,
Ah,
you're not allowed to act like that. Otherwise, you'll find
very
yourself
good.
banned from
Very
the
good.
from games. They have a pretty stringent social media policy. I wonder who wrote that.
Hmm.
They have a pretty stringent use policy,
Great.
and I think that's important because they're building a space for everybody to play in, as opposed to just a few. And what I've really found interesting is in part of that observation, they're actually keeping an eye out for things that don't seem right. You know, that this kid
Ah,
is acting different from normal, you know, so that they could say, "Hey, is everything okay?" Just a voice that says, "Hey, you all right? Everything cool?"
yeah.
And I think that's important because it creates a much different atmosphere from a typical business. And that's got a great deal to do with the clientele. So I think that's truly awesome.
Exciting. I look
We're
forward to visiting and seeing more, and hopefully it'll become the first of many Hitcase VR arcades. Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting to see that VR on the island is becoming quite popular. We've gotten there's a VR place in Courtenay, there's a VR place in Comox. So these are the first three on up here, but there's also a VR developer down in Nanaimo. So I mean, you've got a
Interesting.
lot of VR use and development happening right here on our fuzzy little island.
My
Who
home
knew?
away from home.
You're home away from home. Well, we're going to make you feel at home when you're up here on the 7th.
Thank you.
I'm going to cut this down because I got another broadcast to do at 8:15, this or 8:30, 8:30 that I have to prepare for. And then I'm
All
going to
good.
go to bed.
Thanks for letting
My
me jump
wife,
on, Sean. Good
my
to talk to you
wife
tonight.
told us to be going, go to bed, go to bed. Thank you for joining me, Angela. For those of you who want to look up Angela online, she's at AngelaCrocker&Associates.com.
Just
And is
AngelaCrocker.com.
it
Sorry to
just
correct
Angela
you, Sean.
Crocker? Oh,
Just
excellent. Okay,
AngelaCrocker.com.
AngelaCrocker.com, and look for her book coming out soon on Declutter Your Data. That is going to be awesome because I already am a huge fan of your content planner book,
Thank you.
which is in the pile here under all
Here,
the
I
other
can
ones.
show and tell. You like this one?
Oh, I love that book. I love that book.
And you're going to like this one. See, it's really thin right now.
It's a very short book. Um,
I promise.
but
I
definitely,
wrote so much, they've had to add some of it as a download bonus that wouldn't all fit in a print book. So,
the content planner stuff I also found really useful for my son when it came to his school stuff. Because the content planning that he's doing is the writing that he has to do, the studying that he has to do. So he's actually using, you know, pages from the planner to do the other things that he needs to do. I think that's just,
fantastic.
I mean, it's a great non-planned use. But you can thank Mike Vardy for that one because he started talking about it and I went, oh, I got just the thing.
You
All
guys are
right, Angela,
fabulous.
thank you so much for joining today. And those
You're
of you
welcome.
who are going to watch this later on in the YouTube broadcast, thank you for joining and viewing. Digital Hallway on F2F Broadcasting is going to be a regular feature. We're going to do this on a regular basis. We'll still use BeLive, and we've got Bosco Anthony on December 19th talking about disruptive in the
Great.
digital world, which should be fun because he almost always turns the tables on me. You know, it suddenly becomes me being interviewed by him.
I promise to tune in. That'll be great.
All right. Thanks for joining us on the Digital Hallway.